Hello and welcome. We're going to do some book readings today. We have Mike Eberhardt's making a return and Jeff Messick. I'm going to do some reading from one of my books. And so we'll get this underway. We'll have Mike start off things.
All right.
What are you going to be reading from, Mike?
Today I'll be reading from Looking into the Sun by Todd Tavolazzi. It's a novel of the Syrian conflict, and we're starting with the very opening chapter. So this is how the book begins. You guys ready? Here we go. I felt the shock wave of the bullet that snapped so close to my head, it singed my scalp. A quick succession of several more bullets impacted the dirt a few feet to my right. The moonless night made it impossible to see Raffi, only a foot to my left. The same darkness that disoriented me also kept us invisible to the men shooting at us. The night resembled a black canvas splashed with the disciplined single file of green tracer fire. The mesmerizing beauty of the night was shattered by indiscriminate sparks, spewing from the heavy weapons firing from a few hundred meters behind us. The tsunami of adrenaline that saturated my blood made my eyes shoot their own white tracers that ricocheted inside my eyeballs. I strained my vision to pick out the next spot I would aim for when the shooting let up. A bright flash illuminated the ground in front of us like a flashbulb, and I chose the base of an olive tree 10 meters away as my next target. The flash disappeared, but its ghost lingered in my vision and made it even harder to see. Raffi, that tree, follow me. Okay, he said from the darkness next to me. I shot up the instant the firing stopped and pumped my legs until I felt I'd covered the distance to the tree. I held my hand out in front of me when I figured I was close, but managed to find the tree with my face. The force of my momentum knocked me flat on my back. I actually thought for a second that I'd been shot. I heard Raffi hit the ground next to me. What are you doing on your back? I ran into the damn tree. That last burst half blinded me. I heard him chuckle in the dark. You okay? I rolled over onto my stomach and maneuvered to get the tree between me and the onslaught of bullets I knew were coming. Yeah, thanks for asking. Where's the damn car? It's at the end of this olive grove, about 50 meters. The guns cranked up again, and we buried our heads in the dirt at the base of the olive tree. I heard bullets passing through the leaves over our heads seconds before the ground turned into gelatin from a massive explosion. I turned over and saw the flaming wreck of what used to be the car Raffi borrowed to get us to the Syrian border. They got the car. What the hell do we do now? Plan B, my friend, Raffi said. The hell is Plan B? The river. Where is it? It's over there, about 100 meters, he said, pointing to our left. His face and pointing hand flickered red from the reflection of our burning car, fully engulfed in flames as more bullets chewed up the ground all around our olive tree. Crap, the fire's painting us. They can see us. I was talking to myself. Raffi had bolted up and had a 3-step head start in the direction of the river. Come on, Angus, we can make it, he yelled over his shoulder. Raffi maintained a full sprint 3 meters in front of me. Bullets chewed up our footprints as soon as we made them, all the way to the river. Raffi slowed a bit and then disappeared through a stand of trees that lined the riverbank. I kept up my own speed and felt the prickly slap of branches on my face as I busted through. Then I was falling. The riverbank wasn't high above the water, but the situation had slowed my perception, and it felt like I was falling from a tall building. I hit the cool water and clutched my 20-pound backpack with an iron grip. I thought of my video gear, iPad, and iPhone. I'd packed it all in plastic just as Raffi had suggested, but I couldn't stop worrying that all the footage I'd risked my life to get might be ruined. I put the thought out of my mind as my head broke the surface of the water. I looked around for Raffi and saw his wet curls disappear under the water in front of me. The fire from our car made distorted shadows through the trees as we floated by them. I took a deep breath and dunked my own head as the first barrage of bullets skipped off the water. All we could do was hold our breath and hope they couldn't get a beat on us. I positioned my backpack between my legs and hugged my knees as my body floated down the river at a frustratingly slow pace. With my back barely cresting the surface, I figured if I got shot, it probably wouldn't be in the head. I leaned back and took a breath of air every 10 count as I went through a brief mental checklist and couldn't come up with one thing I could do to improve my situation, except maybe rub the fur off a rabbit's foot. But I didn't have a rabbit's foot. All I had was a 2,000-year-old gold statuette in my pocket. So I rubbed that instead, mostly just to make sure it was still there. I figured if it was still in one piece after 2,000 years, there had to be some luck left in it somewhere. There we go.
That was awesome.
Nice.
Such a fun book. Love this book.
Yeah. Very good. Very good, Mike.
Thank you.
So a little bit about Todd, since he's the author and he's not here with us. Todd's a naval commander. He was based in Naples for several years, which is in charge of the entire Eastern Mediterranean, that entire region.
Wow.
So he had a lot of direct experience with what was going on in the Syrian conflict, especially in the early days, and that inspired him to write the story. And the story is very gritty in detail. It has a lot of information that probably wouldn't be common knowledge about what was going on over there in the early days. And what I really like about his story is that he doesn't make judgments. He puts out the entire situation there and all the different conflicts and all the different geopolitical players that are working in the background and all the ambiguity that forms based on strange alliances. And he makes the story very personal on an individual level. And I think that's the strength of the book.
I like that he's able to interweave some comedy too. There are some truly funny moments despite the seriousness of the overall novel. It really makes it more relatable and really attached me to the characters.
Yeah.
Personally, for me, I think my favorite part, or one of my favorite parts, was that he gave a very clear picture of how many different factions are fighting over there. And really, nobody knows who's fighting who.
That's true.
Yeah, and people that are enemies one day might be allies the next day. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
there's a lot of
It's a great book.
ambiguity.
You know, and it's a civilian population that are taking the brunt of everything. And that's true today as well as when he wrote this book.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's still going on. Well, why don't you, since people may be watching these things out of sequence, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Mike?
Sure. My name is Mike Eberhardt. I'm a voiceover actor based in Southern California. I love to do audiobooks. I also do commercial voiceover and some other things, dubbing and stuff. But audiobooks are my true love because you get to learn so much about the characters. You really understand their motivations and what is happening with them. And it really allows you to understand them and get attached to them. I'm a little unique in the audiobook world in that I do character voices for every single character. They're unique voices. I also learn the accents. And when I started doing this 2 years ago, I couldn't do any accents. And now I've done French, Italian, I've done Arabic, I've done Irish, of course, Southern US. There's just so many, but it's always a fun challenge for me when I find there's an accent in the book. I immediately go to YouTube and try to figure out, how am I going to do this accent? and spend some time building the characters. Like the Japanese general that I did, I studied some things on YouTube and experimented with different techniques to bring that character voice out. And I think that is really something unique about my storytelling, is that I try to give everybody their own unique voice.
All right. You want to go next, Jeff?
Sure.
All right. What you're going to be reading from Mage Hunter, right?
Correct. Mage Hunter, just around latter part of chapter 4.
Okay. Does it need to be set up any, or?
No, other than the fact that the main character, Jace, is 7 years old. He's at the academy, and he is having a lesson with Luther, his instructor.
Okay.
Luther was waiting for him in the stone room. Today, we will be in the courtyard. Luther set off swiftly, which Jace was beginning to suspect the man was wanting to project an air of control over his student. Jace realized he'd used his enhancement technique without even knowing it. A swift chill rushed down his spine. In the courtyard, several other students sat with their guides and either conversed softly or engaged in exercises with the power. Jace was suddenly curious, but Luther took him to a small table with 2 benches. He indicated a seat, and Jace took it without question. Luther sat across from him and looked around briefly. I wanted to show you something important today, dealing with how much of the power you actually have. I hope you don't mind an audience, because once you reach for however much you can hold, others will want to watch. Before that happens, though, I want you to know everything that is going to happen first. This increases the challenge for you, even with your enhancement. Secondly, I don't want anyone else to know what's happening before we start. Do you understand? Jace almost smirked. Politics? Luther chuckled. Safety. It's not good for others to know everything you do, and if they know how to defeat you, they could get ideas at that point. Why would they want to? Luther answered. Because it's in our nature to want to be better than the next person, especially if they exhibit more power than us. So what you're going to do is defeat me somehow? His guide nodded. Yes, to show you that sheer might is an amazing gift, but so is detail and dexterity. I want you to erect the most impenetrable shield around that you can. Then what? Luther grinned. Then I'll defeat it. Jace felt a surge of raw emotion. Good luck with that. Even you said you've never seen anyone with power like mine. Yes, that is true. However, the mightiest may be brought down, and if a mage hunter finds himself at a might disadvantage, then what should he do then? Jace understood. He better get real creative. Luther smiled again and indicated Jace would start. Lattices burst forth from within Jace as well as without, hundreds of colors and thicknesses. He wove them together in a tight curtain and pulled them tighter, like knots the villagers used. Inside that, Jace erected a simple wall of force, then tied everything off. He wasn't even sure how he'd done that, but it was done. His shield was no longer being powered by him, but rather self-perpetuating. As soon as he put it up, other students began to gather around. Luther had been correct. Jace's power drew a crowd. He leaned back a bit. Do your best, Luther. Good luck. Luther nodded, and almost immediately Jace felt a tickle on his chin. He jerked back and thought he saw a lattice retreat, though it was incredibly small. He leaned forward again and quickly felt a tiny tug on his ear. Jace whispered, Arn's breath, how are you doing that? His guide ever so slightly moved his head in a negative, and Jace saw the crowd was pushing in closer. He understood that Luther didn't want them to know what was happening, and he agreed. If his guide, someone much less gifted in the power, could so easily touch him to his own defenses, that would be dangerous information. He redoubled his effort, setting his defenses in motion, twisting and contorting at an incredible rate. Several sounds of amazement erupted from the crowd. He looked at Luther and nodded again. The moment he finished his nod, Jace felt a tickle on his neck. He grimaced slightly and saw the lattice vanish. Luther could easily get inside his shield. How was it possible? Jace's mind roared to life, analyzing everything he knew, including the information that Luther was sweating heavily. Still, in breaching his defenses, Luther had still used a lattice of the power. That, in Jace's mind, could be a weakness. He narrowed his eyes and watched carefully. The lattice snuck in incredibly fast and so small as to make an ant seem huge. However, Jace saw it and used his own power to cut it. As the exercise wore on, Jace only saw one lattice attacked, never more than one, so Luther had limits to what he was doing. Soon after, Jace cut them with ease, though it was still concerned how easy it had been for Luther in the first place. Jace let out a breath he hadn't noticed he was holding. All of his might had been easily circumvented. The chills he had experienced since starting in the academy came back and brought a lot more. Jace was truly frightened, knowing all of his power might not be good enough. Still, with all the man's skill, Luther had used everything he had with the power just to accomplish a single breach of Jace's defenses. Luther nodded, then grinned, and Jace felt several more tickles on his skin. Shock roared through him, and he let his defenses go. He stared at Luther in utter amazement, noting the old man was soaked in sweat, though wearing a triumphant smile. His guide stood up. Enough for today. Let us retire to the chore room. Jace stood and followed, absolutely silent. He didn't notice the crowd parting before him. He didn't notice Leanna waving either. Jace began to feed more of the power into his enhanced thoughts, but felt Luther's hand drop onto his shoulder. Not here, Jace.
That was good. That was good.
Thanks.
So what prompted you to write this book? It's quite a bit different than your first book, which was Knights of the Shield.
I have always been a fan of fantasy books. I have read the entire Lord of the Rings over 27 times. It is a fantastic story. And
Yes,
my
it is.
biggest beef with that whole book series is Gandalf, the greatest wizard in the world, never did anything. I mean, honestly, he never did anything. He just smoked a pipe and gave out advice. Then I read Raymond Feist in the Magician series, and I fell in love because that guy throws some magic around. So I wanted to write a fantasy series where you throw some magic around. So I got Mage Hunter because there's people throwing magic all over the place.
Yeah, actually, I enjoyed that book. I really did, Jeff.
Thanks.
So you're in San Antonio,
Yep.
in Texas. Won't you tell everybody some of your background and what you do for a living besides write?
Besides, right, yeah. Well, I grew up in San Antonio. My dad was in the military, so I've been all over the world. Been Japan, Germany, Spain, Las Vegas, as you are. But I only spent a year there. I was an air traffic controller in the military for 9 years, and then after that, worked at a bookstore for a while, then went and got some more school, and now I'm an IT guy working down at the state hospital here in San Antonio. And I write on the side, of course.
So you're you're kind of on the front lines fixing computer glitches and everything while the people fighting this virus.
Pretty much. It's since all the doctors out there needed to have the ability to work from home, they all got a whole bunch of laptops, and I've been spending the past few days out configuring them all. So yeah, it's work.
So what's next for you? I know you have another book in the series.
Yeah, Priest Hunter is currently in editing. Rogue Hunter, which is book 3, is done. And I am currently working on King Hunter, which is book 4, to be followed by God Hunter, book 5.
So is this series going to be kind of an ongoing, never-ending series, or?
Oh no, it'll definitely end with book 5. I've got a science fiction story I've been working on, and a few other ideas posting around in my head right now.
I know, I've written a series too, and I've always thought that the reason why I write series is I really suck at writing endings. But for example, I'm gonna read an excerpt from Fried Windows, which is the first book that I published with Panda Moon, and I wrote this book to be a standalone, and there's actually a book 2 coming out hopefully soon, and it's as you can imagine, if you've ever read the first book, it's going to be an extreme departure from what's going on in the first book. But I think I think what ends up happening is that you get to the end of the book and then you go through a revision and you go, no, I don't like that ending. I'm going to change this ending. And then you go back, and because what you decided to do at the ending changes some things in the book, and then you got to go back and fix everything again in the book. And then at some point, you suddenly discover some other story that needs to be told. And with the Becoming Superman series, that actually happened during the final editing for the first book in the series, which I had written that book to be a standalone, and my editor Jessica Rhino said, there's some other stuff here, that you could build on. And I said, well, I've been thinking the same thing. I've got some things in the back burner. So we started exchanging it back and forth, and we ended up plotting out 2 other books. And this was before the first book was actually published. So that's kind of the evolution that you go through for writing things. And I know it's different with you, Jeff, because you actually had the idea to have a series of books from the get-go. So how's that different from what I just explained that happened with my process?
Well, the process I ran into with this book series, I knew it had to be a series because I wanted to explore different ages for the main character. My original idea was actually for 7 books, but it got to be too much because I had I wanted him to experience different things, and I wanted him to learn different styles of magic, and more importantly, learn control, because that's what this book series is all about: responsibility and control. I think it comes from, I'm a huge, huge fan of the original Spider-Man comic books. And Spider-Man always had said one thing: with great power comes great responsibility. And I wanted to put that into a book series.
I think you've done a good job. I really I'd like to mention something about your first book, too, The Knights of the Shield.
Mention away.
All right. That story is also, it's a supernatural, paranormal type fantasy book, but it's a police procedural. So it blends the
Yes.
two together. I thought it was a very well written, well told story. The main characters, I mean, I love watching police procedurals on TV, but I also like the ones that blend in, some supernatural elements too, like Lucifer and Castle. Castle really didn't have a lot of supernatural elements, but they were always teasing about it and hinting,
Yeah.
about things. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that book?
That book actually started as a challenge from a writing instructor that I had, who the main goal of the first class was to write the first chapter of your new mystery novel. And that's what I put out. And he sent me back. First of all, he gave me the second whole classes of advanced writing for free because I was the best student in the first class, according to him. And he told me if I didn't finish that book, that he was going to hunt me down and kill me. So it originally started much different than it turned out, but I had these images. It's weird because normally I have the characters tell me the story. But in this case, in Knights of the Shield, I actually had a visual of my characters, because I used to be a big fan of, I'm still a big fan of the author, Robert Parker, the Spencer series. But the TV show they did back in the 80s with Robert Urich and Avery Brooks, I saw those characters and I'm like, this is my story. And I tried to bring Robert Parker out in me. Didn't work quite as well because he's so much better at actual dialogue. He's an incredible writer. But I saw my characters and I knew where I was going. And then, normally my characters tell me the story. These told me less, except when I introduced Richard. When I brought him in, he told me his whole story from the start, which helped out a lot. But yeah, it came from a challenge.
That's great. I always like to hear the backstories behind how people became writers and the challenges that were proposed. I mean, some people will pick up writing and start writing and they publish a book and then they never write another book, or maybe it takes 10 years between books. And then there's people like me that wrote for 25 years before I ever tried to publish anything. And one of the common themes, though, is that at some point you have to overcome your feeling that everything that you write is utter crap.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
And one of the things that you have to overcome is reading the stuff that you wrote 2 weeks ago that you thought was really good and realizing how bad it is.
Another thing that goes along with that is when you get an editor that starts talking to you about your stuff, humility.
Yeah. I mean, I forget who it was that said that there's 3 rules for writing a novel, except nobody knows what those are. That is so true, because everybody has a different way of doing it. So, anybody that's listening to this and wants to know the secret for writing a novel, there is nobody that has a grasp of that. Everybody has their own style, their own situation. For me, it took years and years and years of practice. I've evolved over the years. What I write about carries the story. And I've discovered a way to make my stories work. And I always start off with the dialogue, and then I write scenes afterwards. But some people will create a detailed outline and write from that. What I do is I write the story with the dialogue and feather in the details, and then I go back and I write a structure for it and make sure that it makes sense and there's a flow and there's a story arc and the characters are well developed and everything. So I do a lot of things backwards. So that's probably because I have dyslexia. But
I do a lot of the same thing. I come up with, I call it a hurricane outline. There's all the main ideas and all the plot points that I want to bring out are just flying around out there, and then I just grab them, and it's a very loose outline, and it's just a timeline and everything. It's like puzzle pieces. They're all there, and they all get used. I don't ever know the order until I need them.
And sometimes you look at what you just wrote, maybe a day later or something, and you go, "Who the hell wrote that?"
Yeah, except I know it was me, and I go slink away and hide under the bed.
Right, but then sometimes you write something, and you go back and you read the couple of sentences that you just wrote, and you go, "Wow, that's really good." And you'll go back and read it again, and you go, "Yeah, that is pretty good, but it needs this and it needs this." For anybody that's an aspiring writer out there, that's normal. That's what happens with everybody. I've talked to several authors. Everybody goes through that to some degree. It's varying degrees. That's probably a good segue to move into reading from Fried Windows. The full title of this book is Fried Windows in a Light White Sauce. I'll go ahead and read the story and then I'll answer questions and do some more explanation of it. Chapter 1, Problem Delivery. Mrs. Field's twisted directions were just that, twisted. I couldn't figure them out. There was a computer system to deliver, and the schedule was tight. There was nothing new about that. My frustration and sense of urgency rose as none of the directions on the paper made sense. Street names were real, but how could reality be bent to fit those convoluted directions? 3 days before, Mrs. Fields popped into the computer store where I worked looking for a computer system. There was no salesperson available to help her, so she went back to the tech shop where I worked in the store and asked me. Fine. She said she needed delivery and setup, and since I would be likely the one doing that, I figured I could take a little break from what I was doing. She was a chunky elderly lady, about 5'0", with short cropped hair that sort of looked silver and sort of looked white, depending on how the light hit it. At 6'2", I towered over her. After spending an hour showing her systems and asking her questions, I determined she wasn't at all savvy and mostly incapable of talking coherently. That became very clear when giving me instructions to her house. She didn't know her exact address. You can't possibly miss it, dearie, she assured me as she jotted down the directions. It's the only place that way. So I let it go. I thought I'd find the road she lived on, and it would be the only house, just like she said. After scrabbling with those directions for nearly an hour and still being lost, my options narrowed down to one. Driving to an area that I thought was at least close, I looked for a letter carrier. One was parked at the side of the street, just before the edge of downtown, enjoying his lunch. I wished I had time to enjoy lunch. I had lost 10 pounds in the 2 weeks of nonstop deliveries during a special promotion. Being built mostly like a scarecrow, it wasn't like I had the weight to spare. Anyway, I apologized for interrupting the man's lunch. Then I asked for help deciphering the cryptic direction. Oh, yes, Mrs. Fields, he said. This was good. I was making headway. Apparently he recognized not only the name, but also seemed to know the lady as well. I was sure I'd be receiving precise directions any moment now. Am I getting close at least? No closer than you were to begin with. You see, if you're here, you're still lost. I used to deliver mail to her, he explained. I listened patiently, even though panic was starting to seep in. At least he knew where she lived, so I was listening. The letter carrier fancied himself a storyteller, though, and finally I had to interrupt him. I'm sorry, but I have a lot of things to do today. All I need is for you to point me in the right direction. What's confusing is that she told me to drive to the edge of downtown and then uphill. This is the only hill I know of. I mean, I've only lived here for a few years, but I haven't seen any other hills around, not in this part of Florida anyway. This is the only hill in town, he confirmed. And directions say just before I reach the hilltop, make a U-turn and look for a street at the right. When I find it, turn left. Not the first left, but the second left, and take the more crooked road of the two. Yes, and you drive straight down that road, he said, with a laugh. She's telling you exactly how to get there, obviously. That's how she drives. Straight down a crooked road. Yes, precisely, he confirmed. She gave you the right directions. The second road is crooked, but it is the most direct way to get to her house. I think that's what she meant by straight. Okay. Glancing down at the directions, I tried for a little more clarity. She says to look for a farmhouse where there's no barn. It has a large front door, a small front porch, and no windows. Yep, that's her place. That's it to a T. She lives in a house with no windows? Well, as I understand it, there was a tough season a while back. The crops were not up to expectations. The money was hard to come by. What does that have to do with why there are no windows in the house? Did she have to sell them? No, according to her, she actually ate them. Did I misunderstand? She ate the windows? Fried them up, served them a light white sauce, he said, and then laughed. That's what she told me anyway. It's crazy. Before you pass judgment, get to know Mrs. Field. She's a gem. She has a story to tell everyone and anyone. But the story she tells is always intended just for you. I really don't have time to. You should make time, Brent, he said, stealing my name with a brief glance at my name badge. It'd be well worth the effort. Just have an open mind, a wide open mind. She has a rare gift, but you really have to want to receive it. And she eats windows. Well, I don't know that for a fact. It's what she told me, though. Maybe she wanted to make me laugh. Her sense of humor is a little bizarre. Still, the fact remains that her house has no windows. Once you get to know her, none of that will bother you as much as it does now. Trust me on that. You'll never look at the world the same way. If that's intended as a sales pitch, it's not working. Hey, you make your own decisions, guy, he said. You think you can find it now? I'll give it a shot, I guess. My confidence was at an all-time low. When you feel like you're lost, you're probably getting close. Drive until the glare of the afternoon sun is so bad that it blinds you. Pull over at the side of the road and look through the haze and you'll be there. You're as crazy as she is, he laughed. Like you're not. Well, I have my doubts sometimes. Everyone does. You think everyone's crazy. In fact, mostly we are. We differ by degrees, I suppose. But this is truth, my friend. If you want to learn something different, you can't keep looking in the same place and expect to find anything but what you already know. If you think about it, being crazy isn't such a bad place to start when you need some novelty in your life. I have enough trouble dealing with things the way that they are. I'm certain I don't want to learn anything from a lady who eats windows and gives strange directions to her house. Look, others don't measure up to your expectations, probably never will. But that's okay because you don't measure up to their standards either. So why judge anybody? Once you get past judging others, amazing things can happen, he said with a wink. It doesn't make sense. Of course it doesn't. Look, people like to think they're going to be logical. Logic can be useful understanding some things, but it can also restrict you from going places and finding what you're looking for. That's what I learned from Mrs. Fields. You speak as if she's your teacher. Mentor is a better word. Here's the fact. I used to be frustrated. My job is important. I get that. People depend on the prompt delivery of their mail. But I was upset because I always wanted to be something else. Never in my wildest youthful dreams did I think that when I grew up, I'd fight in a strange foreign war that we couldn't win, and afterwards, I'd end up delivering mail in some sleepy little coastal town in Florida. I was going to be a police officer or a firefighter or a cowboy or one of the astronauts they shoot into space from the Cape, you know? A real hero, somebody others look up to. And after I connected with Mrs. Fields, I understood that everything I ever desired was still inside of me. And when I was a kid, the little things I do every day made me a hero to somebody. And that probably is as good as probably as good as it gets most of the time, at least on this side of reality. She told me that as I grew older, I misplaced some dreams. That's all. They were still there. It's just other things got put in front of them. Priorities, you know. If your mind is open to all possibilities, you can find the dreams you lost. When you do, you'll be forever young where it counts. He tapped an index finger to the temple of his head for emphasis. Okay, did I lose anybody?
Nice.
Yay, I had to turn on the camera so you could see me clapping.
Yay.
It's been a
What ends up
since I've
what
seen
ends up happening? What ends up happening to Brent in this book is his life gets very crazy and very divided between the two extremes, and he's trying to juggle the two. And Mrs. Fields helps him reacquaint himself with his childhood memories, his childhood friends, and he discovers those imaginary friends from childhood weren't imaginary after all.
Oh. You got me imagining that windows are made out of like a thin layer of rock candy. I swear I'm going to be walking through my neighborhood going, that looks pretty tasty.
Well, that might be possible in this world. The thing is that the fantasy element of the story is a world that where anything is possible. You just have to use your imagination.
Love that.
So it is a strange book. I've had a lot of feedback from people who read it that have told me that it's different than anything else that they've ever read. And this part here is one of the normal parts of the book.
Now, you mentioned that this was originally written as a standalone, but you're coming out with a sequel. What motivated you to write another book?
Actually, Brent as a character appears in book 2 and 3 of Becoming Superman, and putting the pieces together for Brent's life there necessitated me writing more about the Brent character from the Pride Windows period, which actually happens after Becoming Superman. So it probably doesn't make sense outside of my mind, but you had to write how it finished to know where it began, and you had to know where it began to write how it finished. So that's why this second book evolved, and it starts out where this book ends off, actually, where Brett ends up in an alternate universe version of New Orleans. This kind of straddles the divide between our world and the other world that Brett has gone into in the Five Windows book.
Huh.
And I realize that alternate universe New Orleans is kind of redundant.
Jeepers. Nola's going to have a word with you.
What's really kind of weird about Elgon's books is, for instance, his second series, Becoming Superman, it's tied in, but there's time travel, parallel universes, magic, all these things are going on, and it actually makes Fried Windows make more sense. It answers a lot of questions.
He's done the one thing that is really hard for a lot of fantasy authors out there, is to create a world, an actual world where everything fits together with so many different stories.
I thought it was just drugs, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was the guys that did the front cover for the original front cover for the book asked me what drugs I was on when I wrote it. But I don't do drugs.
Mushrooms.
Do you have a favorite character in there, Elgon? I know when I do narration, I always get attached to one character more than another.
I love Straw. I mean, I have a personal attachment to Brent because he's kind of my alter ego in a lot of ways.
Okay.
But, I really love Straub. Straub is
Strawberry Field forever.
Oh, it's getting more druggy. I see the connection now.
Yeah, there are a lot of there's a lot of links and homages to music in general, especially Beatles music. I mean, I was a huge Beatles fan throughout college. I still am. I still love listening to their music. But they were an exceptional influence. Their music started off being simple and it got more complicated as they evolved as musicians in a group, and then they split off in their own directions and continued to make great music. So there's a lot in there about that. There's some other references to other groups that I liked when I was growing up. Music plays a big role in all my books.
Cool. Great. Well, thank you for sharing with us today.
Thanks for asking questions.
It was actually the first book out of all the Panda Moon books that I read after becoming a panda myself, and it's just one of my favorites.
And he's still staying around.
Yep.
I'm so jealous you get to read all these books. I know I talked last time we had this meeting. I don't read the books in advance. I just read them. When I first get an audiobook to read, I'll read 4 or 5 chapters to get the flavor. But after that, I never read ahead. So I'm terrified of reading any panda books because I don't know if I'll be asked to do the audiobook and I don't want to spoil it.
Well, if you read Elgon's books, that won't be a problem because without the drugs, you never know what happens.
Yeah, sometimes you find things that you didn't know were there even after you've read it a few times.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
As some background, I had a teacher when I was in the 9th grade who told me I would never be a writer, and that's kind of
that's horrible.
That's the impetus behind me even trying to be a writer, I think. She and I became pretty good friends after I graduated from high school. I continued to write to her from college, but she and I had a tempestuous type of relationship during high school. And I was a good student. I wasn't a great student, but I was a good student. And I got along with most of my teachers, but with her, there was always a conflict. I didn't fully understand that, and I would like to think she was trying to draw things out of me, my creativity and everything, but just that our personalities didn't mesh in a student teacher relationship. But I garnered some respect for her over the years, and by the time I was a senior, the funny thing was she was one of the faculty advisors for the school newspaper, and so like immediately after she told me that, I joined the newspaper staff and started doing stories and writing for that, and I eventually got a column my second year with the staff, and then my senior year I was the editor, and that whole experience kind of led me to study journalism to begin with in college, and toward the end of my coursework for my degree in journalism, I realized that I really didn't like being a reporter. After doing some internships, I've been a disc jockey on a radio station. I've operated camera for an on-camera reporter for the local TV station. So I saw a lot of different aspects of the whole broadcasting industry, and I determined that I could do this, but it didn't interest me that much. And I'd taken some courses in advertising and public relations and decided that my interests were more aligned with the marketing side of things. So I ended up going to the University of Texas and studying marketing. And received a degree in that. So I ended up having a lot of different experiences, and I was in college for way too many years. And that whole time I was writing. So that's where it evolved. And toward the end of all that, while I was in Austin, I got so disgusted with everything I had written. I had boxes and boxes of stories that I'd written, and I got so disgusted with the entire process, I threw most of that stuff away. It had to be like 20,000 pages. So
Wow.
just went straight to the dumpster, and I never looked back at it. And sometimes when I tell people that people that love books and reading and getting all that, their eyes get big and they go, can you imagine the wonderful things that are in there? No, believe me, it was all utter crap. It was all intended to set me in a certain direction, and that's where that all came from.
Yeah, you can just look at that as, time spent honing your craft and sharpening your skill set.
That's all it was. And really, I wrote a book that was loosely based on tarot cards, and for lack of having another title, I called it Tarot. And it created a fantasy world of sorts that kept evolving. And most of the stories that I wrote as an adult came from this fantasy world that I was creating about the characters from the major arcana of tarot. And as I got old enough, had a family, had kids, I was trying to find stories to tell to my daughters for bedtime stories that would be inspiring to them growing up. And I couldn't find any books that were good, children's books that had strong female characters.
Huh.
And so I started just telling them stories at bedtime that had strong female characters. And
Wow.
those were little things that were extracted from the story that I started creating back when I was in college. So at some point, I decided to start writing all that stuff down.
Gotcha. So when are you going to do the tarot readings for all of us on these live viewings?
I've done it before, but I haven't done it in a long time, and I would probably shy away from doing it because I've had some strange experiences around that whole thing.
Ooh, that sounds like a good short story in the making. Next thing you know, you're eating windows.
Yeah, next thing you know, you're eating windows or writing about people who do.
Right. Well, thanks for giving us some insight there, Elgon. It's really fascinating to hear your process
thank
and
you.
where you're coming from.
Yeah, now I can put the lid back on my mind. We'll go ahead and end it there for the night. We're going to attempt to do this every week for a while, just give everybody the opportunity to enjoy some fantastic stories. We're doing promotions simultaneously or concurrently with this. We're doing a 99-cent promotion on a lot of our ebooks, probably the majority of our ebooks. And we're also doing some free promotions for people to download ebooks and read them, enjoy them, stories. We really want to get the word out that Pan the Moon authors are something special, and we're creating a growing community of creative people here at Pan the Moon, and we want to expand that as far as it will go and just explore the possibilities. Even inviting people from the outside to help us understand this thing that we're creating in the Pandaverse.